All religions are basically the same. And this objection can come in a variety of forms and oftentimes presents itself as very tolerant and inclusive. But the facts have a way of getting in the way of this sort of mindset and definition of tolerance. You see, when you say that all religions are basically the same, what do you mean by basically? The essentials of each belief contradict each other, so essentially they are different. If you would note a difference between basics and essentials, you may have a point, but the problem is there is a big difference between those two, and we need to take one as a priority over the other. Likewise, every religion in and of itself claims to be true. Now, that is either true or it's not. If one is true and makes claims that excludes the others, then it alone is true and the others are false since they conflict with a true statement. Every religion teaches about heaven, hell, God, the devil, our morality, our origin, and our purpose, and the teachings on these topics differ widely. Saying they're all the same because they address the same topics is like saying that all school subjects teach the same thing, since they all involve a teacher, students, a rubric, a topic, and on it goes. But the problem is those topics, those teachers, and those rubrics are all very different if you examine them closely. So, when we examine the facts that every religion makes claims that fundamentally exclude all others from itself, what do I mean by that? Can I put my money where my mouth is? Well, let's start with Christianity. According to Christianity, its teachings about God are that there is one God with a unique nature, Father, Son, and Spirit. The Son became a man in a moment of history and showed that he is God, and not only God, but a God of perfect justice and mercy by judging all sin, but also offering mercy at his own expense, so a relationship with man could be possible again. If we take a look at Islam, we see a very different God. According to Islam, there is one God, so numbers are correct, but this God doesn't have a unique nature, rather. He is one being with one essence. He can't enter this world. He can't eat food. He can't interact with man in any way apart from mediators like angels, and you can't have a relationship with Allah apart from a slave-to-master relationship. The earliest documented record of anything resembling the Quran is found on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem today, where it notes that God is not begotten, nor does he beget. Now that's either true and Christianity is false, or Christianity is true and Islam is false. Likewise, if we go in a little bit further east, we run into Buddhism. And Buddhism teaches that there is no personal God. The universe is the eternal and ultimate essence of which everything is and will return to once you become enlightened. Buddhism shows how this is done. In Hinduism, there are hundreds and thousands of gods. Now that directly conflicts with what Christianity and Islam and Buddhism teach, because Buddhism teaches there is no God separate from the universe. The Islamic religion teaches there is one God separate from the universe, and Christianity teaches there is one God with unique nature, fundamentally different from the God of Islam. Hinduism teaches there's hundreds of thousands of gods, all with their own unique attributes and agendas, so that obviously wouldn't fit. It has something in line with paganism, but also note this, there are many gods in paganism, but instead of resembling these attributes, they are representatives of different aspects of nature. So these would be different from Hinduism in very specific ways. Also note that atheism claims that there is no God at all. It would have something in common with Buddhism on this regard, but we'll examine further details in a moment. And also note that cult groups make their organization the determining factor on what is right or wrong on behalf of their God. So whether or not you're going to make the claim that these religions all teach the same thing, so far when it comes to the nature of God alone, we have just mentioning the examples that we looked at here, the cult groups, the Hindus, the Buddhists, all 7 of these examples are fundamentally different from one another. You can say that one is correct, or you can say that none are correct, but you can't say all are correct because they make an absolute statement on the nature of God. But let's not stop there. What does Christianity say about the devil? Well, according to Christianity, the devil is an angel of great power, but an angel nonetheless. His influence isn't the origin of evil, but he is the original being that separated himself from the source of everything good. So there will be a tie-in to morality there in a moment. He will ultimately face justice, but until then is used as a living example of what exactly is the alternative from a relationship with God. In Islam, on the other hand, the devil is not an angel, but a jinn, or a genie. And what's interesting is that he's not exclusively the enemy of all mankind, but merely one enemy to the Muslims alongside Christians, Jews, and non-Muslims, those who stand in the way of Islam's truth claims. That's very different. In Buddhism, there is no personal devil. The one thing that separates you from the divine is suffering, or what they refer to as dukkha, and the lifetimes you must die and reincarnate before you are enlightened and become one with the universe. In Hinduism, there are hundreds of thousands of demons as well as gods, of which are all unique with their own agendas and attributes. In paganism, there is no specific devil, regardless of which culture you go into. They have positive and negative traits for every single one of their gods. The greatest enemy to your relationship with God are essentially the whims and moods of the gods you're worshiping. So your God can also be your devil if you catch him on a bad day. In atheism, there is no devil per se, but the main enemy of the atheist movement, at least in specific cases, are the people who believe there is a God. They are blamed for everything wrong with this world. So they would be the adversary, the diabolos. That's what the word devil means. Also note that in cult groups, the devil is essentially identified as anyone who isn't a part of your religion. We can note specific examples. In some cases, the Mormon Church recognizes there's the Church of God and the Church of the Devil. They do recognize a personal devil, but consider the adversary of the church those who apostatize, those who leave or fall away from the church, or the individuals who reject the teachings of Joseph Smith, the Church of the Devil. So, noting these very specific differences, what about heaven? Well, according to Christianity, that is wherever God is. Very little details are given in Scripture. We can name all the total of maybe 4 chapters that mention or even go into any details about it. But the emphasis for Christianity is all about knowing Jesus. Now, in Islam, heaven is very different. Heaven couldn't be given in more detail. In fact, so much detail it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It is a carnal, a physically based paradise of wine, prostitutes, and everything else that Muslims are motivated by in the Quran and Hadith. In Buddhism, heaven doesn't exist. The only goal is to ultimately one day not live in a world of suffering or happiness anymore. In Hinduism, Brahman is described as comparable to heaven. It is the ultimate essence and the eternal nature of the universe that you are essentially and eventually assimilated into, like Buddhism. But also note that becoming an impersonal part of everything and nothing would be the one common factor they have, not the case for Christianity or Islam. In paganism, heaven, or the underworld as it's referred to in some areas, a form of it at least, is where you leave the physical and become immaterial and enjoy a place of various pleasures which can be enjoyed, carnal or otherwise. It depends on the cultural context of the paganism. For example, Wicca's Summerland and the Norse realms of the dead are carnal. The Roman and Egyptian realms of the underworld are simply peaceful. In atheism, there is no heaven. Good deeds have no reward. And cult groups recognize that heaven is your continued membership in your organization and community. Even after death, the goal is to remain a part of the organization. You can see this with Mormons, with Jehovah's Witnesses, with various other cult groups in all their glory, but noting that the organization is the emphasis, not on being where God is, but where your people are. This is very different from the representation in paganism, in Buddhism and Hinduism, in Islam, and in Christianity. Hell in Christianity is separation from God. It is a state, notice, a state of torment, not torture, where you are given what you want if you refuse a relationship with God. The only thing that also includes is a absence of all of his good and perfect gifts. It is an eternal state. In Islam, hell is a carnal pit of torture. Notice difference in Christianity, that directly punishes you in specific ways for specific actions and given in explicit detail. It details the food in multiple different ways. It talks about you only being able to eat rotten fruit or pus or the thorny fruits of this specific type of Arabic tree, which escapes me right now. But all of these things are told and noted as well. According to the Hadith, the majority of the inhabitants of hell are women, and male Christians will be sent there for the sins of Muslims, according to Sahih al-Bukhari 6664 through 6668, who have done enough good deeds to outweigh them. In Buddhism, hell doesn't exist. It is essentially the worst fate of a Buddhist to continue living on this earth, to suffer. In Hinduism, once again like Buddhism, the curse is reincarnation. To live is hell. To stop coming back after you work out your karma is to escape this hell we know as life. In paganism, hell is also found in the underworld in, again, various ways depending on your source, but also noting, depending on the whims of your god, you can be tortured forever based on the displeasure of your god on personal or legal levels. Notice that it's not based on a set rule. For example, pushing up a rock and only to have it fall down the other side, being eternally taunted with a river of drinkable water and grapes, but always being out of your reach, being taunted and so forth. These are based on the whims of these gods. In atheism, there, of course, is no hell. There is no justice for evils done in this world. That is simply a delusion. And in cult groups, hell is separation from or disassociation from your community in this life and the next. So while it uses the same terms as Christianity, the emphasis is on the organization, not on God. Morality in Christianity is God's nature. Sin, or literally the archery term to miss, is falling short of that standard and requires the sacrifice of Jesus to redeem you from and restore you, heart and mind, back to God. In Islam, the definition of morality is a little different. At the beginning of your life, two angels are placed on your shoulders to record your good and bad deeds. At the end of your life, they will place their records of you on a scale, and you'll have the opportunity to climb a thread to a razor-thin bridge to paradise. If your bad deeds outweigh your good, or you fall at any time during this crossing, you will go to hell. Good deeds aren't based on Allah's nature, but Muhammad's example. This includes the morally reprehensible things that he's done, such as child marriage, executing apostates and critics, and other things that are justified in the Muslim world because Muhammad is their living example, their walking Quran. So instead of morality being based on God's nature, Islam puts forward a human being, Muhammad, as the moral example. And when you realize he did some good things, he was against female infanticide, encouraged prayer and giving to the poor, but he also did some very morally reprehensible things. These both have to be accounted for. In Buddhism, there is no morality. Right and wrong are concepts absent from Buddhism, and good and evil in the universe must be balanced. Therefore, if good happens, karma actually demands that evil happen elsewhere, and vice versa. That's why a Buddhist goal isn't to do good or evil for anyone. The most devout Buddhists lock themselves away from the world and do nothing but meditate to keep everything neutral in balance. In Hinduism, we see a similar aspect, but not entirely. There is no objective morality in Hinduism. Due to the massive number of gods, good and not good are based on whichever god you choose to follow in pursuit of Brahman. Likewise, for paganism, different gods have different standards. Therefore, since a person following one god could deliberately violate every standard of another god, but doesn't answer to them concerning morality, there is no objective standard for all people at all times in paganism. That's very different from Christianity and Islam and Buddhism and so forth. And likewise, cult groups are determined by their organization. Whatever is right in your organization's eyes is what is right in God's eyes. In Christianity, we see our origin is that God created us in His image. We are moral, personal, and relational beings that reflect His spiritual attributes. That is what is meant by in His image. Therefore, we are intrinsically valuable at a higher level than any other creature because of our origin. In Islam, our origin is explained by Allah knows. His actions and reasons for doing so are His own, and according to the Quran, people shouldn't ask questions lest they lose their faith and by extension lose their lives. Muhammad commanded that if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him, and you can have no faith unless you have no resistance to the things that Muhammad commanded and did. So our origin is simply not explained. It does bear some association and reference, but the question as to why still remains. In Buddhism, makes no claims about our origin. It only addresses where you are and how you get out of it through practical and moral indifference. In Hinduism, likewise, when we're asked about our origin, there is none. Time is a cycle that will continue forever and never began. There are some scientific problems with that, but we're not discussing that here. In paganism, it varies depending on the culture that references it, but the common cultural assumption is that chaos became conscious and started having kids with his wife that just sort of showed up one day, and we also likewise just happened along the way as a result of either battles between these superpowered kids, like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or accidents that are no less explainable than they are, like Egyptian, Norse, and pagan myth. In atheism, we essentially are told, most often they reference the Big Bang, but without a probable or conscious cause. So our origin, according to atheism, was in the beginning there was nothing, and it blew up. And cult groups describe our origin based on what they affirm or deny based on other religions. So they don't really have any original claims. Sometimes they associate with Christianity, other times they don't. But that is a point of emphasis for them. It's all on the organization, not on the sacred text or the founder. Then finally, our purpose, according to Christianity. God created us for a relationship with Him. Restoration to that relationship is the ultimate goal and priority of the God of the Bible, where our ultimate fulfillment is found. Now, is this the same as Islam? Unfortunately, it is not. Your purpose in life is Islam, to submit to God the way Muhammad did. If you don't, or you don't enough, you will be killed by Muslims and punished by Allah. You will be charged as a hypocrite or a apostate. In Buddhism, your purpose is to die and come back again and again until all of the good and evil you have done is undone by karma and you are enlightened, never to exist again. It's very different from Christianity and Islam. In Hinduism, our goal is to escape this reality like Buddhism, and though reincarnation attempts this through the caste system, the favor of your God is also an important factor in this. In paganism, every pagan god is essentially just a bad habit with a name on it, so the most consistent view of our purpose in paganism is the pursuit of pleasure. Just do what feels good and seems right to you. Feelings are the ultimate standard. Atheism claims there is no purpose for life. To the dust we came, to the dust we shall return. That's quoting the Bible, by the way. And cult groups note that our purpose in life is to support and build up the influence and financial stability of our organization. So, with all that said, according to the first law of logic, the law of non-contradiction, two things can't be true in the same way and in the same sense and also cancel each other out. If someone claims that the religions of the world all teach basically the same thing, we need to point out that essentially they are different. The individual who makes this claim either doesn't know what they're talking about or is lying for the sake of their quote unquote greater good, and that is to remove conflict between these factions. If they make truth claims and you believe that they're all false, then you should simply say so. But if you do recognize there is truth in each one, pick a side. But don't do so at the cost of truth. We give you enough credit to recognize that there is, in fact, a claim to stand by and live for, but also note as well the reason I've chosen Christianity is because, as Francis Schaeffer once observed, it is a key to reality that fits exactly right. And since it makes claims that exclude all these other religions, I have to be honest and point out why I also don't believe those. I do this out of love for the people who adhere to them, not out of hatred for their existence. I just simply recognize their answers to the question of who is God, what is our reason for being here, what is our ultimate purpose, where did we come from, who is our adversary in this world, and what is the basic foundation of our ethics. Well, it's very different from the other options that have been put out there, and so I can't be so disingenuous as to disrespect someone and give them that soft bigotry of low expectations and simply dismiss their ability to think rationally about these things. Every single religious group, atheism included, makes these claims, and they fundamentally contradict the others. So either one is right, none are right, or one is. But here is the point. They can't all be right. So make sure that this very poorly thought through perspective on these religions, and we could go through more, but isn't brought forward in these comments or anywhere else. Thank you for your time. If you have sincere questions or want to know in more detail where, in fact, these claims are made within the sacred text of these scriptures, let me know. But I'll once again look forward to talking to you next time, where we'll be discussing the claim that the Old Testament isn't historically reliable. Until then, God bless you.